She was paying for her oil change when she noticed his sleeve had rolled up. There, faded but unmistakable, was a tattoo that made her breath catch. Not because it was impressive, but because her brother had died earning one just like it. "You were a pilot," she whispered. "Weren't you?" Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this tale of hidden wings and silent sacrifices, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who choose silence over glory. The mechanic's bay at Murphy's Auto Repair smelled like motor oil and old coffee. It was the kind of place where conversation came in grunts and nods, where the radio played classic rock at just the right volume to fill the silence without drowning out the sound of wrenches on metal. Sarah Martinez had been bringing her Honda there for 3 years, ever since moving to the small town of Cedar Falls for her teaching job. She liked the place because it was honest, no fancy waiting room, no pressure to buy extras, just solid work at fair prices. The man who usually worked on her car was quiet, methodical. She'd never learned his name, though she'd seen it stitched on his coveralls, Frank. He appeared to be in his 60s, with silver hair kept short and hands that moved with the precision of someone who'd spent decades working with machinery. His face was weathered but kind, with lines that suggested more smiles than frowns, though she rarely saw either expression. He simply did his work, gave her the keys, and sent her on her way with a polite nod. That Tuesday in October started like any other. Sarah had dropped off her car at 7 in the morning before school, and now, at 4:30, she was back to pick it up. The afternoon sun slanted through the bay doors, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Frank was finishing up, wiping his hands on a red shop rag as he emerged from beneath the hood. "All set," he said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years around engines. "Change the oil, check the fluids. She's running smooth." Sarah nodded, reaching into her purse for her wallet. "What do I owe you?" $45, Frank replied, already moving toward the small office to write up the receipt. As he leaned over the counter, his sleeve rolled up his forearm, revealing skin that had seen decades of sun and work. But it wasn't the weathering that caught Sarah's attention, it was the ink. Faded blue-black against tan skin, partially hidden by the fabric of his coveralls, was a tattoo that made her breath catch in her throat. Wings. Not just any wings, but the distinctive design she'd memorized from photographs, from ceremonies, from the flag that had covered her brother's coffin. Naval aviator wings, the kind earned through months of grueling training, the kind that marked a man as one of the few who'd been trusted with million-dollar aircraft and the lives of those who depended on them. Sarah's hand froze halfway to her wallet. Her brother Danny had died in Afghanistan in 2009, his F/A-18 Hornet going down during a close air support mission. She'd been to enough military ceremonies, seen enough dress uniforms, to recognize those wings anywhere. But seeing them here, in this quiet shop, on this quiet man, felt like stumbling across a piece of her brother's world in the last place she'd expected to find it. Frank noticed her stillness. He looked up from the receipt book, his pen hovering over the carbon paper. "Everything all right, miss?" For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. She stared at the tattoo, now mostly hidden again as Frank's sleeve had fallen back into place. When she finally found her voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You were a pilot. Weren't you?" The change in Frank was immediate and subtle. His shoulders stiffened just slightly, and his eyes, which had always been friendly but distant, sharpened with something that might have been caution. He set the pen down carefully, deliberately, and straightened up. "Why do you ask?" Sarah's eyes dropped to his forearm, where the edge of the tattoo was still visible. "The wings. My brother, he had the same ones." Frank followed her gaze, then looked back at her face. Something in her expression must have told him this wasn't casual curiosity. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something in his mind. He asked quietly. "He died in Afghanistan. 2009, Lieutenant Daniel Martinez, VFA 87. The words came out automatically, the way they always did when she talked about Danny. Rank, unit, year. The basic facts that could never capture who he'd been. Frank's expression softened. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. I'm sorry for your loss. It was the response she'd heard 1,000 times, but something in the way he said it, with a weight that suggested he understood the specific kind of loss that came with military service, made her push further. You flew, didn't you? The tattoo, that's not something you get unless you've earned it. Frank was quiet for a long moment. He glanced toward the bay doors, where the afternoon light was starting to fade, then back at Sarah. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. Long time ago. Different life. Sarah stepped closer to the counter. What did you fly? Another pause. Frank's hands were still on the counter, and Sarah could see the edge of the tattoo more clearly now. The wings were faded but precise, the kind of work done by someone who knew military ink, who understood what it meant to wear those symbols. A-4 Skyhawks, mostly. Some F-14 time later on. He said it matter-of-factly, but Sarah caught the slight change in his posture, the way his shoulders straightened just a fraction when he mentioned the aircraft. Navy, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Frank nodded. 26 years. Retired as a commander. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Commander. 26 years. This quiet man who'd been changing her oil, who she'd barely exchanged a dozen words with, had been a senior naval officer. Had flown combat missions. Had lived the life her brother had been meant to live. When did you retire? She asked. 2001, just before. He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah understood. Just before September 11th. Just before the wars that had taken her brother. Why didn't you say anything? All these times I've been here, talking about Danny, about missing him. Sarah's voice trailed off. She'd never talked extensively about her brother at the shop, but there had been moments seeing an Air Force commercial on the waiting room TV, hearing a news report about Afghanistan, when she'd made small comments about having a brother in the military. Frank's expression grew even more careful. Wasn't my place to say. And, it doesn't change anything. Your brother's gone. Me talking about the old days doesn't bring him back. But Sarah shook her head. It does change things. It means you understand. It means you know what it was like for him up there, what he was thinking, what he was doing. For the first time since she'd seen the tattoo, Frank's composure cracked slightly. He looked down at his hands, and Sarah could see something working behind his eyes, some internal struggle she didn't fully understand. Your brother, he said quietly. What happened to him? Sarah took a deep breath. She told the story so many times, but it never got easier. He was providing close air support for a ground unit that was pinned down. Taliban had them surrounded in a valley outside Kandahar. Danny's squadron was called in to help extract them. Frank nodded, his expression grave. And? He made 3 passes, took out the positions that were keeping our guys pinned. But on the 4th pass, something went wrong. Maybe ground fire, maybe mechanical failure. The plane went down. Sarah's voice was steady, but Frank could see the pain in her eyes. They never found his body. The wreckage was in Taliban territory, too dangerous to recover. Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. Close air support. That's the hardest flying there is. Flying low, flying slow, putting yourself between the enemy and your people on the ground. Takes a special kind of pilot to do that well. He was good at it, Sarah said. His squadron commander told me he'd saved more lives than they could count. But that last time, he did what he was trained to do. What he was supposed to do. He put the mission first, even when it meant putting himself at risk. Frank's voice carried a certainty that surprised Sarah. That's what we do. That's what your brother did. Sarah looked at him more closely. You've been there. You've made those kinds of decisions. Frank's jaw tightened slightly. Different war. Same choices. Vietnam? A nod. 2 tours. 1969 to 1971, then again in 73 to 75. flew off the Kitty Hawk in the Constellation. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She'd read about those deployments, those years. The height of the Vietnam War, when carrier pilots were flying some of the most dangerous missions in military history. "What did you do?" Frank looked toward the bay doors again, as if he could see something there that Sarah couldn't. "What we were told to do. Interdiction missions, mostly. Hitting supply lines, transportation hubs. Some close air support, like your brother. Some reconnaissance. And you never talked about it. Never told anyone here?" Frank's laugh was short and bitter. "Who would I tell? And what would I say? Hey, back in the day, I dropped bombs on people. I watched friends die. I came home when a lot of good men didn't." He shook his head. "People don't want to hear that. They want to thank you for your service and move on. They don't want to know what service actually means." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I do. I want to know." Frank studied her face again, and this time, what he saw there seemed to make some decision for him. He walked around the counter, moving slowly, and gestured toward two folding chairs that sat against the wall of the office. "Your car's not going anywhere," he said. "If you really want to know, I'll tell you. But it's not a pretty story." Sarah nodded, settling into one of the chairs. Frank took the other, his movements careful, deliberate. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the distant hum of the overhead lights and the occasional car passing on the street outside. "Your brother," Frank said finally. "What was he like? Before the service, I mean." Sarah smiled for the first time since she'd seen the tattoo. Danny was the kind of kid who built model airplanes and knew every fighter jet by silhouette. He had this poster on his bedroom wall, the Blue Angels in formation, and he used to stare at it for hours. When he was 12, he told our parents he was going to be a Navy pilot, and they laughed. But he was serious. He took flying lessons in high school, joined ROTC in college, did everything right. Frank nodded. "Sounds familiar. I was the same way. Grew up in Ohio, farm kid, but all I wanted was to fly. Joined the Navy straight out of high school, went through flight training at Pensacola. Thought I was going to be Tom Cruise. What changed?" Frank's expression darkened. "Reality. Combat isn't like the movies. It's not about being a hero or proving how tough you are. It's about completing the mission and bringing your people home. And sometimes, you can't do both." He paused, his hands working absently at the shop rag he'd been carrying. "I lost my wingman on my 4th mission. Kid named Tommy Sullivan, from Boston. 22 years old, married 6 months before deployment. We were hitting a supply depot near Haiphong, and Tommy's plane took a direct hit from a surface-to-air missile. Watched him eject, watched his chute deploy, watched him disappear into the jungle. Never saw him again." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "How did you keep flying?" "Because that's what you do. You grieve, you honor the dead, and you keep flying. Because the mission doesn't stop, and the people depending on you don't stop needing you to do your job." Frank looked directly at her. "Your brother understood that. On that last mission, when he made that 4th pass, he understood that the soldiers on the ground were counting on him. He chose to put their lives ahead of his own safety. But he died," Sarah whispered. "He died doing what he was trained to do, what he'd sworn to do. He died saving people." Frank's voice was gentle but firm. "I know that doesn't make it hurt less. I know it doesn't bring him back. But it means something. It means his life mattered." Sarah wiped at her eyes. Did you ever think about quitting? About walking away?" Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Every day. Especially after Tommy. But I couldn't. Not when there were other young pilots depending on me, other missions to fly. And later, when I became a squadron commander, I couldn't leave the younger guys to face what I'd faced without someone who understood, someone who'd been there." "Is that why you stayed in for 26 years?" "Part of it. The other part was that I was good at it. Not because I was brave or special, but because I understood what it cost. I understood that every mission was a gamble, every decision could mean the difference between someone coming home or not. And I took that seriously. Sarah looked at Frank with new eyes. This quiet man, who'd been invisible to her for 3 years, had carried the weight of command, the responsibility for other people's lives. Had made the kinds of decisions that kept her awake at night just thinking about them. Why did you retire? Frank's smile was sad. Because I was tired. Tired of making those decisions, tired of carrying that weight. I'd given the Navy everything I had, and I wanted to do something simpler. Something where the worst thing that could happen was a car breaking down, not a pilot not coming home. And you came here? To Cedar Falls? I came here because it was quiet. Because nobody knew who I was or what I'd done. Because I could just be Frank the mechanic, not Commander Frank Mitchell, not the guy who flew 200 combat missions and lost too many friends. He gestured around the shop. This is honest work. When I fix someone's car, it stays fixed. When I tell someone their engine is running smooth, it is. It's simple, straightforward. No hidden agendas, no politics, no life or death decisions. Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to process everything she'd learned. All these years, I've been coming here, missing Danny, wishing I could talk to someone who understood what he went through. And you were here the whole time. I was here, but I wasn't ready to talk. I spent the first 10 years of retirement trying to forget what I'd seen, what I'd done. It's only been the last few years that I've been able to think about it without. He trailed off. Without what? Without wondering if I could have done more. If I could have saved more people, made better decisions, been a better leader. Frank's voice was quiet. Survivor's guilt, the VA calls it. The feeling that you should have died instead of the people who didn't make it home. Sarah felt a wave of understanding wash over her. Is that why you never talked about it? Because you felt guilty? Frank nodded. That, and because I didn't want to be seen as a hero. I wasn't a hero. I was just a pilot doing his job. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home, like your brother. Like Tommy Sullivan and the dozen other pilots from my squadron who died in Vietnam. But you were a hero, Sarah said firmly. You saved people. You led people. You served your country for 26 years. Frank looked at her with something like surprise. How can you say that? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you've been fixing my car for 3 years and never charged me more than it was worth. I know you've been carrying this weight alone, not because you had to, but because you thought that's what you deserved. I know you just spent the last hour telling me about my brother, helping me understand what his life meant, and you didn't have to do that. Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Your brother, he sounds like he was a good man. A good pilot. He was. And so were you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Finally, Frank stood up, moving toward the counter where Sarah's receipt still waited. What I told you, he said as he finished writing up the charges, about my service, about Vietnam. I'd appreciate it if you kept that between us. I'm not ready for the whole town to know. Sarah nodded. Of course. But Frank, would you mind if I came by sometimes? Just to talk? About Danny, about flying, about whatever. Frank considered this, then nodded slowly. I'd like that. It's been a long time since I've talked to someone who understands what it means to lose someone in service. Sarah paid for her oil change and walked toward her car, but she paused at the door. Frank? Thank you. For telling me about Danny, about what he was doing when he died. It helps, knowing that someone who's been there understands what he went through. Frank nodded, but Sarah could see the emotion in his eyes. Thank you for asking. It's been good to talk about it. About all of it. As Sarah drove home, she thought about the strange turn her ordinary day had taken. She'd gone to get her oil changed and discovered that the quiet mechanic who'd been working on her car was a decorated combat pilot, a man who'd flown the same kinds of missions that had claimed her brother's life. She thought about the tattoo that had started it all, faded but still proud on Frank's arm, a permanent reminder of the life he'd lived before Cedar Falls. But more than that, she thought about the weight he'd been carrying alone, the guilt and the memories and the loss. She thought about how similar it was to her own weight, her own grief, and how much lighter it felt to share it with someone who truly understood. Over the next few months, Sarah began stopping by the shop regularly, not just for car maintenance but for conversation. Frank gradually opened up about his experiences, sharing stories of his squadron mates, his commanders, the missions that had gone right and the ones that had gone wrong. In return, Sarah shared her memories of Danny, the brother who'd dreamed of flying since childhood and died doing what he loved. Their friendship became something precious to both of them, a connection forged by shared loss and mutual understanding. Frank began attending the town's Veterans Day ceremonies, no longer hiding from his past but honoring it. Sarah started volunteering with military families, using her teaching skills to help children of deployed parents. The tattoo that had started it all remained faded on Frank's arm, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was a reminder of service, of sacrifice, of the bonds that connected those who'd served and those who'd lost someone in service. It was a symbol of the truth that had brought them together, that sometimes, the most important conversations happen in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, and in a small auto shop in Cedar Falls, between a teacher who'd lost her brother and a mechanic who'd found his voice. The memory of Lieutenant Daniel Martinez lived on, honored not just in ceremony but in the quiet understanding between two people who knew what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, and to carry on. The simple question, "You were a pilot, weren't you?" had opened a door that had been closed for 20 years. Behind that door was a story of courage, loss, and the enduring bonds that connect those who understand the true cost of freedom. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, and worth sharing with anyone who believes that the greatest heroes are often the ones who never ask to be called heroes at all. So I ask you, have you ever discovered that someone ordinary was actually extraordinary? Have you ever found a hidden story in the most unexpected place? Share your story in the comments below, and tell us what city you're watching from today. Because here at the Human Stories, we believe that every person carries a story worth telling, and every story deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll see you in the next story, where we'll continue to honor the quiet heroes who walk among us every day.